In most countries, deliberately eating raw pork is something you'd never do. Most people would think it is dangerous and maybe even as a little bit disgusting. But in Germany, there is a food called Mett. It's raw minced pork, usually mixed with a little bit of salt and some pepper, topped off with raw onions and eaten on a bread roll. And it isn't some kind of an obscure delicacy, it's actually everyday food. You can buy it at the butcher and even in the supermarket. And in some regions, people eat it also for breakfast without thinking twice about it. Now, that's a question that I would like to answer today is how can this be possibly safe? Why can Germans eat raw pork when almost everywhere else in the world this would be considered genuinely a bad idea? And this is because raw pork is not without risk, but Germany has a whole system of controls built around managing that risk. And that system is actually the interesting part. And here's a small spoiler before we start. The problem isn't only bacteria. There's also a parasite involved, a worm called Trichinella. And once you understand what that worm actually does, you'll see exactly why cooking pork matters so much. And here's how I'll approach it. First, I'll explain what Mett actually is. Then I'll walk you through the risks, and there are actually two main ones, bacteria and parasites. And finally, I'll show you what German authorities do to make raw pork safe enough for people to eat. And for anyone who would like to see that parasite up close, I got a microscope slide of Trichinella here that I'll be putting under the microscope later. So what is Mett? Well, let's start with the basics. After one of my recent videos where I talked about the microbiological risks of eating raw fish and raw beef, a few viewers left comments asking about raw pork. And I thought that's actually a really interesting topic, especially because raw pork is so common in Germany and not eaten anywhere else. You often see pork steak cooked medium rare, but Mett is different because it's completely raw ground pork, seasoned with salt and pepper and topped off with some raw onions. And one thing I want to stress is how genuinely common it is. The Robert Koch Institute, which is Germany's National Institute for Infectious Diseases, they put it quite plainly and they reported, and I'm now quoting here, raw minced pork is frequently eaten in Germany even by small children. Now, interestingly, the dish doesn't really have an inventor. It grew out of the old practice of eating very fresh pork straight from the local butcher. Mett became a mainstream food back in the 1950s and 1960s during Germany's post-war economic recovery. This was when people could now suddenly afford to eat a lot more meat than they could during the war years. And finally, a bit of history that reaches across the Atlantic. German immigrants brought the tradition over to the United States in the 19th century. And in Wisconsin, they ended up with their own version. It's a local specialty called the cannibal sandwich. This one is different in that it's made with raw ground beef rather than pork. I'll be honest though, despite all of this, I've never actually eaten it myself, also because it's not readily available outside of Germany. Now, as I've already mentioned in previous videos, you genuinely have to be careful with any uncooked meat and fish, and the reason is that certain bacteria can live on the meat and those bacteria can make you ill. Cooking the meat kills them off, and that's actually one of the reasons why we cook food in the first place. So how do those bacteria now end up on the meat to begin with? Well, the animal's digestive system is full of bacteria, and during the slaughtering process, some of them can actually get spread onto the meat. A few of them can be quite infectious, names you might have already heard before, like Salmonella, Campylobacter, Yersinia. All of them can make people sick. And it's not just theoretical, there have been real cases of people actually falling ill from eating Mett. The biggest outbreak of 2024 is a good example of this. Raw pork contaminated with Salmonella made 191 people sick with 3 fatalities. And what really frustrated the authorities was that they were never able to trace the contaminated pork back to its source. And as a matter of fact, raw minced pork really is one of the leading causes of foodborne illnesses in Germany. Now, every single one of those cases is serious, but it's also worth keeping some perspective because millions of portions of Mett are eaten across the country. So while the risk is real, the chance of actually getting sick from any single serving is still fairly small. Now, there's an important detail here about why ground meat is actually riskier than steak, because when you fry a piece of meat, then the heat kills off the bacteria on the outside surface, and that's fine. Even if the center stays a little bit underdone, there aren't any bacteria in there to begin with because the contamination sits on the surface. But the moment you start grinding up the meat and mincing it, then you essentially mix the bacteria on the outside all the way through. And all of a sudden they spread throughout the whole mass with a huge surface area to multiply quickly. So with ground raw meat, you have to be especially careful. But bacteria aren't the only problem, because there's a second kind of risk with raw pork, and that's a very different one. It's parasites. Now, before I get into the main one, this is also a good moment to mention something else. Because of everything that we've talked about, the German authorities actually advise certain groups of people not to eat Mett at all. This includes young children, older people, and anyone with a weakened immune system, simply because their bodies are less able to fight off an infection. Also, pregnant women are on that list, and for them there's a specific parasite to worry about. It's called Toxoplasma gondii. In healthy adults, it usually causes only mild symptoms or even none at all, but it can pass on to the unborn child and cause serious harm. So it's a clear case where raw pork is best avoided. Yeah, but the parasite that actually makes pork a special case is a different one. It's the worm that I mentioned at the start. It's called Trichinella. Cooking pork kills this worm and it stops its life cycle. But pork carrying Trichinella, when it's eaten raw, the worm can actually infect the person, and it can even settle in their own muscles. So let me show you a little bit how the worm looks like under the microscope and explain to you what it does. So what you're looking here is the cross section of an infested meat. If you look carefully, you might be able to spot the tiny capsules embedded in the muscle. Now each one holds a single larva coiled up inside, and was able to find several of them on this slide. And here's how the whole thing actually works and how the worm reproduces. Someone eats meat containing these larvae, and down in the stomach and in the digestive system, the larvae are released and grow into adult worms. And those adult worms then produce new larvae, which travel through the bloodstream to the muscles all over the body. And once they reach the muscle, then the larvae curls up and forms a new capsule, exactly like the one on the slide. And if another animal then later eats the muscle, then the whole cycle starts all over again. And this is really the key idea here, because the parasite passes from host to host through muscle that's eaten raw. Cooking stops that cycle because the heat kills the larvae before it can even get a chance to reproduce. So what does this actually do to the person? Well, it tends to come in two phases. Now, in the first phase, while the worm is still in the intestine, you might actually get nausea, stomach pain, and diarrhea. And in the second phase, the new larvae are now traveling through the body and they're settling down in the muscle. And that brings fever, muscle pain, and often fairly distinctive swelling around the eyes and in the face. And a blood test at this stage can also be done, and it shows that there is an abnormally high number of a particular type of white blood cell present. So blood testing can also be done. Now, if the infestation is mild, then the person can recover, but a heavy infestation can actually become quite dangerous. The larva can move through a lot of different tissues, including the heart muscle. It can go to the brain and affect it too. So this is not a minor thing, really. It's a severe Trichinella infestation can actually also be fatal. And that's exactly why the control system around pork is as strict as it is. So how does Germany now manage all of this? Well, there's not a single thing that makes raw pork safe. It's really a combination of several measures, all working together. So let me go through them. The first measure is actually how pigs are raised. Pigs bred for the food market, they live in a controlled environment. They're kept indoors, they can't hunt or scavenge for food, and they're given feed that is free of the parasite. Because of that, farmed pigs almost never carry Trichinella. In fact, under officially recognized controlled housing conditions, it's essentially never been found. Wild pigs, wild boar, are a completely different case though. A wild boar roams freely and might eat other animals, including infected ones, and that's what completes the parasite's life cycle in nature. So wild boar meat carries a genuine risk, and it's handled differently, which I'll come back to. There's also a historical point worth mentioning here, because in the past, scraps and wastes from slaughterhouses were sometimes fed back to the pigs, which is a very direct way to complete the parasite's life cycle, because you're essentially feeding parasite-infested meat to an animal that will itself be eaten later. Now today, feeding that type of animal waste to farm animals is banned across the European Union. Now the second measure is testing. The rule in the EU is fairly clear. In principle, every slaughtered pig, every wild boar meant for human consumption has to be tested for Trichinella. There's one exception. Pigs from farms officially recognized as being controlled housing can be exempt because the risk there is considered low, which is really the same point as before. If the pig never had any realistic chance of getting infested, testing every last one of them isn't necessary. So how is the test actually done? Well, it happens after the slaughtering. Inspectors, they take small muscle samples, and the samples are then dissolved using artificial digestion. And this frees any larvae hidden inside the muscle so they can be collected and counted under a microscope. If larvae turn up, then that animal cannot be used for food. And just to give you a sense of the scale here, across the European Union, more than 200 million pigs are tested for this parasite every year. And the third measure covers what happens once the meat leaves the slaughterhouse. And this is mostly about the bacteria rather than the worm. Minced pork sold to be eaten has to follow special rules. In practice, it can generally only be made and sold on the very same day, and it's meant to be eaten on the same day as well. That really isn't something that you keep sitting around in your refrigerator for the rest of the week. The cold chain is controlled strictly as well. The meat has to stay cold without any interruption from production all the way to sale. Cold temperatures slow the bacteria down and give them far less chance to multiply to a dangerous level. Now, if the cold chain is broken, then of course this protection is lost. So why can Germans now eat raw pork? Well, the answer is that there is no single thing that makes it safe. Instead, a whole chain of measures works together to bring the risk down. How the pigs are raised, the testing after slaughtering, the strict rules on freshness and cold storage. Put all of that together and raw pork can be sold and eaten with a fairly low risk. But fairly low is not the same as zero. As we've seen earlier, raw minced pork is still one of the leading causes of foodborne illnesses in Germany, and even a strict system can fail sometimes. And if you'd like to see how this same story plays out with other types of food, I've made videos on the risks of raw fish and also of raw beef and how they get managed as well. There are links to those videos. Now that's all from my side. Have you already eaten raw pork before? Would you like to try it? Well, do leave your comments below. It's all I would like to share with you today. Happy microbe hunting as always, and hope to see you in the next video. Bye bye.